These right here, garbage. All of them. Red Purple Law is a awful deck. Know that I am someone who has been hyped about this deck ever since the leader was spoiled. I played awful variants in OPO4, played it through OPO5, played it in multiple regionals in OPO6, and I'm telling you right now, as someone that owns the entire card pool in alt art variants, the deck's garbage. It's garbage right now. If you haven't played the One Piece card game for a long time, RP Law is currently the second coming of OPO3's Katakuri, where all the cards released are extremely powerful, the leader is very pushed, everyone's definitely afraid of the deck and complaining about it, and yet, it's not doing anything. It's not only not the best deck of the format, it is actively the worst choice of the best decks that you could take to a major event. And the reason for that is, it's completely invalidated by the other decks in the top tier. Going back to OPO3 Katakuri, this deck was released super hyped and super powerful. It was clearly one of the best decks in the format, doing crazy stuff with triggers, swinging for 7,000 power with only one Dawn, plus getting free info and arranging life. On top of that, it was playing up to 8 copies of Big Mom in one of the smallest card pools in the game. But even with all of that, it was still not a favorable choice for large events in OPO3. Because within the other S tier decks of the format were Whitebeard and Red Green Law, 2 decks that were highly favored in the matchup on paper. And when you just know that at the top tables, you're going to consistently be paired against something that you are at a disadvantage to, or at worst, you're a 50-50 mirror match on, you're going to struggle to succeed as a deck point blank. And that is happening again right now with RP Law and OPO7. The difference is, Asia didn't figure this out until it was too late. So their data shows RP Law dominant in OPO7. Our data is going to look a lot differently because of one deck and literally one card. Black Yellow Luffy and Rocket Ship Luffy from OPO7. The clean and clear top 4 decks of the format are RP Law, OPO7 Lucci, Bonnie, and Black Yellow Luffy. Now, Lucci is obvious in how it's a bad matchup. It's a 5-life black leader with tons of removal, gets to lean into 4-cost Lucci and 8-cost Moria plays, and now also has the new 8-drop Sabo to dismantle your board. Pretty unfavorable for the RP Law matchup, not completely unwinnable, but on paper, not favorable. Bonnie is a tricky one as well. You can definitely fight into their boards with 8-cost kids, and often enough get under them to take the win. I wouldn't call it highly favorable, it's definitely in that middle ground for both players, and if you have a mid-game stumble on curve, or you run into specific card quality issues with cards in your hand, for even just a turn, you can really end up behind. But Black Yellow Luffy matchups are downright depressing. In that matchup, you were already reduced to most of your RP Law deck, feeling like you were just spinning your wheels and not being very impactful. The main cards that matter in that matchup end up being Kid and Killer, Mr. 2, Shariah, and Blocker Law. Plus, Blocker Law is only conditionally good because, yes, ripping 2 cards out of hand is great, but if you don't hit the right cards in this specific matchup, completely at random, by the way, they'll probably leverage what they do trash just fine with their Moria and Leader ability. And yes, Reiju is still broken in RP Law as always, but it's really just about digging for those other specific cards, and drawing much else feels like wheel spinning. So before, the way you had to win was to keep them to a 7,000 power leader and leverage 3 swings or 2 swings plus reduction, since they'll probably stick at 1 life plus 1 blocker. Or they make a 9,000 or 11,000 leader with 0 life, and it's about removing the blocker Sabo and leveraging a Shariah or a Mr. 2 you set up in one big swing. The latter being worse because if your opponent just doesn't resolve a Moria, then you don't really have a lot of leverage with the Mr. 2 to get in there, and you're fighting an uphill resource battle to threaten lethal. But now, thanks to Rocket Ship Luffy, it's completely invalidated what we just talked about, right? Mr. 2, Shariah, they do not have rush, they do not impact the board to turn their played, you need to set them up. And Rocket Ship Luffy says, no, no, no. And it's not just because it's removal, okay? I want to get that through. It's not just, hey, the deck is removal and you crumble now. There's a very specific reason why it's good. And it's the value generated. And it's that consistent value generated while interacting that is causing RP Law problems, giving it 2 really bad top tier matchups that's making the deck perform awful in the format. And I want to break down just how much value the Rocket Ship Luffy gives. It gives an insane amount, and you really need to see it broken down, kind of like breaking down the value of Bonnie Leader in Limited to see, wow, this card is producing a lot, okay? So let me show you exactly what makes it this crazy. So at face value, the card is a 5 cost, 6k power character that lets you trash it to KO a 4 cost or less character, then draw a card replacing itself. Yes, that part's conditional at being 2 or less life, but we all know what deck Black Yellow Luffy is, so we'll ignore that and say you're just gonna do it. So off the rip, that seems relatively balanced. You also have a nice trigger to KO a 4 or less without drawing a card, which staples on some extra value in deck building. But while 5 Dawn for KOing something and drawing a card is pretty fair, that's not how this card is being utilized 90% of the time. At the worst exchange rate for this card, outside of just playing it for 5, we're paying 2 Dawn for Hiyori to set it up in life. Then we're paying 2 Dawn to play 2 cost Luffy from hand and trashing it, putting Rocket Luffy in the play and giving your leader a 2000 power buff until the end of your opponent's turn. Then we're using Rocket Luffy to KO a core piece of our opponent's board and essentially replacing the Hiyori we played by drawing a card. And the Rocket Luffy that was in hand is already replaced during the life swap. So you paid 1 card in hand with your 2 cost Luffy and 2 Dawn to KO one of your opponent's best targets at the cost of also committing 2 Dawn to pump your leader 2000 power for a turn cycle. That's pretty good for a worst case scenario, so let's go one further. You attach 2 Dawn to leader and activate leader ability. You put the rocket ship Luffy into life with the card you pitched, essentially mitigating the cost of discarding the card. Your leader is also at 7000 power for the turn. Now you pay another 2 Dawn to play a 2 cost Luffy and trash it to play the rocket ship Luffy from life, adding another 2000 power to your leader. Rocket ship Luffy then KOs an opponent's core piece of their board and draws a card. Now we put our leader to 9000 power for the turn, 7000 power for your opponent's turn, KO'd something, and replace the 2 cost Luffy we played from hand with the draw, all at the cost of 4 Dawn. That's way more value than the printed 5 cost playing it from hand that the card was designed as. And of course, thanks to the most broken card in the game, Gecko Moria, we can make this card not just absurdly free to use, but push it way further into generating value. With Moria, we spend 8 Dawn to get a 9000 power body and generate 2 2-cost bodies from trash. Moria is already super broken, so we're already plussing super hard for the entire turn off the rip. Now we put 2 Dawn on leader, giving it 2000 power for the turn, and discard a card to put Rocket Ship Luffy and Sabo into life. Even if we already have 2 cards in trash to target, the discard from hand will be replaced by the Rocket Ship Luffy draw, so we're still up on resources. We trash our 2 cost Luffy to upgrade to a Rocket Luffy, and buff leader by 2000 power for a turn cycle. Rocket Ship Luffy KOs a core piece of the opponent's board and draws a card. And now, because we've drawn first off Luffy, when we trash our 2 cost Sabo from Moria to play Sabo from life, we've generated an extra card selection for his draw 2, trash 2. That helped set up a hand to better defend our now 9000 power leader for our opponent's turn, and dig for our next turn's combo pieces. Which is the most important thing to remember, that Black Yellow Luffy players will be doing these types of value plays with the Rocket Luffy multiple times per game, widening the gap in value generated turn over turn while dismantling an RP Law board. And of course, in other matchups, they can play reduction to make Rocket Luffy hit bigger targets, the looped Sabos invalidate black removal. The deck's absolutely wilding into this meta. And I was already planning on shooting this video today. I came to this realization early last week, and I just wanted to sit on it and really playtest some more, really make sure before I made this video that I was positive in this finding of RP Law's share of the meta, how good it pairs into the meta, because locally I'm known as the Law player. So I can't just make this statement and be absolutely wrong, right? But luckily over this weekend, I was even more reinforced, because take a look at the conversion rates at the Milan Regionals. RP Law had 158 registered players in the event. It only took 3 of the top 32 spots for a 1.9% conversion rate. Meanwhile, Black Yellow Luffy took the most at 7 spots out of 90 players for a 7% conversion rate. Even Lucci, who only had 6 decks in the top 32 and was the most registered deck for the event at 250 players, finishes at a 2.4 conversion rate, ranking above Law. Whether you like it or not, the math ain't mathing for RP Law being the best leader in the game. And listen, I want to be clear. I'm not saying you can't perform well with RP Law. I'm not saying you can't win events. I'm not saying you shouldn't play it. You should play whatever you have fun with. And of course, deck mastery is a huge component in this game of converting wins. You're going to be able to beat players where you're unfavored on paper if you know the matchup better than they do. That's just facts, okay? But if your goal is topping an event, that's what you care to do, that's your metric of success for the event. And we, as a community, are talking about discussions of banning RP Law because of the results it had in OPO7 in Asia and OPO8 in Asia. We need to take a step back and look at the true reality on the ground right now. That this deck isn't actually that insane compared to the other best decks. And on paper, is actually extremely unfavorable in this metagame. That Black Yellow Luffy and Rocket Ship Luffy were completely overlooked in the Asian metagame and actually invalidate the deck so hard and create a really bad metagame space for it. And that in OPO8, it is without a doubt Black Maria that is the problem card that lets this deck do insane resource generation that any good deck could abuse if it was able to just recover extremely well or generate resources in a way no other deck can or should honestly be able to do. But let me know your thoughts, your findings playing the metagame so far this format. I'd love to hear it. Maybe I'm overlooking something. Maybe I don't get something, but I feel pretty confident about this. And we'll also have our full metagame update video coming out soon. I just wanted to get this one out here. You know, it's kind of a spoiler on the overall top end perspective. I've just been wrestling with this idea of like RP Law being actually bad for like 2 weeks, and then the last week being like, oh, I think it is bad. Let's really pinpoint what the problems are. And so yeah, I just thought it was important to make this video first. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Law and Ace are the goats of One Piece. Tell Moist Critical to collab with us. Peace!